Book 2, the Book of the Traveller of the Worlds, Canto 3, the Glory and the Fall of Life. An uneven broad ascent now lured his feet. So he leaves the kingdom of the subtle matter, the subtle physical world. He left that fine material paradise. His destiny lay beyond in larger space. That's the end of Canto 2. Canto 3 begins with, an uneven broad ascent now lured his feet, answering a greater nature's troubled call. He crossed the limits of embodied mind. So what does embodied mind mean? Mind that is embodied mind that is in a physical or subtle physical body. He crossed the limits of embodied mind and entered wide, obscure, disputed fields where all was doubt and change and nothing sure, a world of search and toil without repose. As one who meets the face of the unknown, a questioner with none to give reply, attracted to a problem never solved, always uncertain of the ground he trod, always drawn on to an inconstant goal, he travelled through a land peopled by doubts, in shifting confines, on a quaking base. In front he saw a boundary ever unreached, and thought himself at each step nearer now, a far retreating horizon of mirage. A vagrancy was there that brooked no home, a journey of countless paths without a close. Nothing he found to satisfy his heart, a tireless wandering sought and could not cease. There, life is the manifest, incalculable, a movement of unquiet seas, a long and venturous leap of spirit into space, a vexed disturbance in the eternal calm, an impulse and passion of the infinite. Assuming whatever shape her fancy wills, escaped from the restraint of settled forms, she has left the safety of the tired and known, unshepherded by the fear that walks through time, undaunted by fate that dogs and chance that springs. She accepts disaster as a common risk. So he enters from the kingdom of subtle matter, of the subtle physical world, into the next plane of consciousness. This is an inner journey he's taking. And this he enters into the country of life, the glory and fall of life. So this is the plane of the life force, or what you call as prana, of the energy. And here everything is inconstant. This is the thing of life, that it keeps changing, it's never the same, it's a bit tiring. And he found nothing there to satisfy his heart. Their life is the manifest incalculable. What is life? A movement of unquiet seas, a long and venturous leap of spirit into space, a vexed disturbance in the eternal calm, an impulse and passion of the infinite. Assuming whatever shape her fancy wills, escaped from the restraint of settled forms, she has left the safety of the tired and known, unshepherded by the fear that walks through time, undaunted by fate that dogs and chance that springs. She accepts disaster as a common risk, careless of suffering, heedless of sin and fall. So you see the power of life, the energy, prana shakti, the life force is something that is like this, careless of suffering, doesn't care, it just carries on. Constant. You see how life in its many myriad forms is all around us. Whole of nature is life. And how it continues to profligate without care, careless of suffering, heedless of sin and fall. She wrestles with danger and discovery in the unexplored expanses of the soul. So this is the original life force from where our life forms on earth come from. So this is the prototype place. And she is the goddess of life that he is describing here. To be seemed only a long experiment. To be seemed only a long experiment, the hazard of a seeking ignorant force. So the life force, this hazard of a seeking ignorant force that tries all truths and, finding none supreme, moves on unsatisfied, unsure of its end. As saw some inner mind, so life was shaped. From thought to thought she passed. Who passed? Life. The force of life, life force. From thought to thought she passed, from phase to phase, tortured by her own powers, or proud and blessed, now master of herself, now toy and slave. So life sometimes is a master of herself and sometimes becomes a toy and slave. A huge inconsequence was her action's law, as if all possibility must be drained. If you see the way life forms, energy of life, the force of life, tries out many, many experiments. All forms it tries out. Some die, some survive. It goes in, it is never satisfied. It keeps on moving and traveling and experimenting and growing and doesn't care. That energy is so strong, the life force in us. So therefore, even in human beings, the life force is what pushes us to keep exploring, to try new things, not to be tamasic. It is the rajasic force in ourselves, which is the life force in the kingdom of the glory and this particular inner kingdom. So this is where the life force originates from. So the life force is also called the vital energy, the vital force, the vital in us. It's in all of nature. So to be seemed only a long experiment, the hazard of a seeking ignorant force that tries all truths and finding none supreme, moves on unsatisfied, unsure of its end. As saw some inner mind, so life was shaped. From thought to thought she passed, from phase to phase, tortured by her own powers, or proud and blessed, now master of herself, now toy and slave. A huge inconsequence was her action's law, as if all possibility must be drained, and anguish and bliss were pastimes of the heart. In a gallop of thunder-hoofed vicissitudes, she swept through the race fields of circumstance. So this is the life force. It's also what is very much symbolized in the horse. If you see the language he's using here for the life force, is the gallop of thunder-hoofed vicissitudes. Thunder-hoofed obviously is a reference to horses galloping. And she swept through the race fields. Race fields is obviously the race course where horses race. So she swept through the race fields of circumstance. Of what? Not of the race course, but of circumstance. So this is how the life force acts. It also acts in us. It acts in all animals. It acts in all nature, animate and inanimate. In a gallop of thunder-hoofed vicissitudes, she swept through the race fields of circumstance, or swaying she tossed between her heights and deeps, uplifted or broken on time's inconstant wheel. Or swaying she tossed between her heights and deeps, uplifted or broken on time's inconstant wheel. Amid a tedious crawl of drab desires, she writhed, a worm mid worms in nature's mud. Then, Titan-statured, took all earth for food. She rides in the worm, and she also is in the Titan, the huge Asuric Titan-stature, took all earth for food, that wants to take all earth for itself, ambitioned the seas for robe, for crown, the stars, and shouting strode from peak to giant peak, clamoring for worlds to conquer and to rule. Then wantonly, enamored of sorrow's face, she plunged. Who is she? The life force. She plunged into the anguish of the depths, and wallowing clung to her own misery. So she goes either one end to the other end. This is how the life force, even in ourselves, work. You see? So at one point we're very happy, elated, next point we are thoroughly depressed. So this is the movement of the life force. Then Titan stature took all earth for food, ambition the seas for robe, for crown the stars, and shouting strode from peak to giant peak, clamouring for worlds to conquer and to rule. Then wantonly enamoured of sorrow's face, then suddenly getting attracted to sorrow's face, she plunged into the anguish of the depths, and wallowing clung to her own misery. In dolorous converse with her squandered self, she wrote the account of all that she had lost, or sat with grief as with an ancient friend. A romp of violent rapture soon was spent, or she lingered tied to an inadequate joy, missing the turns of fate, missing life's goal. A scene was planned for all her numberless moods, where each could be the law and way of life, but none could offer a pure felicity. Only a flickering zest they left behind, or the fierce lust that brings a dead fatigue. So you see this is the life force in action. You go from one extreme to the other extreme, in the middle, and the up and down. You can never, it's so restless, it never is satisfied. A scene was planted for all her numberless moods, where each could be the law and way of life, but none could offer a pure felicity, pure bliss. Only a flickering zest they left behind, or the fierce lust that brings a dead fatigue. Amid her swift, untold variety, something remained dissatisfied, ever the same, and in the new saw only a face of the old. For every hour repeated all the rest, and every change prolonged the same unease. The spirit of herself, an aim, unsure. She's unsure of her aim. She's unsure of her spirit. Who? Life force, the life energy. A spirit of herself, an aim unsure, tired soon of too much joy and happiness. You see how even our own vital natures can't take too much happiness and too much joy. It needs sadness to pepper its life. It needs some sort of variety all the time. It cannot stay on that high pitch of bliss. This is the reason why, because the original life force is like this. A spirit of herself, an aim unsure, tired soon of too much joy and happiness. She needs the spur. Please note again the horse imagery, because horse power, the vital is a symbol of the horse. The life force is symbolized best in this one animal of the horse. So, a spirit of herself, an aim unsure, tired soon of too much joy and happiness, she needs the spur of pleasure and of pain, and the native taste of suffering and unrest. She strains for an end that never can she win. A perverse savour haunts her thirsting lips, for the grief she weeps, which came from her own choice. For the grief she weeps which came from her own choice. She makes her choices, and then she cries about her misfortune and the bad circumstances of her life, and how things are not going well for her, and so on and so forth. Very reminiscent of the way human beings behave. So a perverse savour haunts her thirsting lips, for the grief she weeps, which came from her own choice. For the pleasure yearns that racked with wounds her breast. So that pleasure she yearns that earlier racked with wounds her breast. So she wants pain. She wants that. She takes pleasure in pain and delight in unhappiness and suffering. And if there is too much bliss, then she gets tired of it and wants to go the opposite direction. For the grief she weeps, which came from her own choice, for the pleasure yearns that racked with wounds her breast, aspiring to heaven, she turns her steps towards hell. So she, in her head, her mind, she wants to go up, but her actions are the opposite. They are taking her towards hell. That means her actions are opposite to her yearning and aspiration. That's the same for us human beings. We all want to go up and progress, but our actions on the ground are opposite. We get used to the small, petty pleasures of life. We want our time. We want to enjoy ourselves, which is We want to waste our energies doing this and that on mobile phones or reading books or chit-chatting with friends. All the things that take you away from an aspirational, progressive life. So this is the nature of the life force that is in this world where Ashwapati travels. The book of the traveler of the worlds, the glory and the fall of life. So the life force is glorious, but also it is, because it's restless, because it doesn't know its aim as we started in the beginning, doesn't know why it's there for and for what purpose. It is not guided by the psychic. It is not under the rule of the psychic. It's free like a wild horse. Therefore, it loses its way and does all these things. So, she needs the spur of pleasure and of pain, and the native taste of suffering and unrest. So this is a very typical, symptoms of the life force. And that is why the same appears in us. If we notice our own self, we see the same, the life energy in us also behaves in the same way. What is this way of behavior? A spirit of herself and aim unsure, tired soon of too much joy and happiness. Now, if we have too much joy and happiness, we also get tired, because the life force in us cannot take it. She needs, who needs? The life force. The spur of pleasure and of pain, and the native taste of suffering and unrest. So if there is no suffering, there is a sense of wanting to, there is a kind of a need for it in the life energy, in the vital being. The life energy is what? In the human being it translates into the vital force, the vital energy. What is the vital energy, Anuradha? In the human being. So vital energy is translated as what? How does this happen? Tired soon of too much joy and happiness. She needs the spur of pleasure and of pain, and the native taste of suffering and unrest. She strains for an end that never can she win. A perverse savour haunts her thirsting lips. For the grief she weeps which came from her own choice. So she gets tired of joy and pain, joy and too much of joy and too much of happiness. Then she starts seeking some pain. Then when the pain and the grief come, then she starts crying. But she has herself caused the grief and the pain that has come to her because of her own, nature. So this is a very subtle things that Sri Aurobindo was pointing out. You have to be extremely observant of human nature and of your own nature, which is a part of human nature, to see how these reflect in the way we behave and the way human life behaves. If you see around you, it's the same thing. There's a sense of wanting to have something new. One gets tired of monotony. When one gets tired of monotony, one tries to look for some sort of newness. Now, if the newness is too joyful and too good and too great, then you say, oh, now it again gets monotonous, again gets dull. Then you seek for some suffering and pain. Then when you have the suffering and pain, it comes, then you start crying and weeping, but you have caused your own suffering. So this is what Sri Aurobindo is saying. This is the nature of the life force or vital nature in life, whether it's nature, whether it's animals, whether it's human beings, whether it's life in general. You will always see this up and down, up and down, up and down. That static bliss, of ecstatic bliss, is very difficult for the human being to hold. Why? Because of the life force in us. So this comes from this kingdom of the glory and the fall of life. So this is the life force. So anything that has the life force in it will function in the same way. But of course the degrees of manifestation are different. Okay, so no, what I'm trying to say is try and observe how this pertains to your own life and to the life you see around you. So, she strains for an end that never can she win. A perverse savour haunts her thirsting lips. For the grief she weeps which came from her own choice. For the pleasure yearns that racked with wounds her breast. Aspiring to heaven, she turns her steps towards hell. Chance she has chosen, and danger for playfellows. Fate's dreadful swing she has taken for cradle and seat. Yet pure and bright, from the timeless was her birth. Yet the life force in its origin was pure and bright and timeless. So her origins are absolutely pure. But when she enters into manifestation, this is how the character, that the life energy or the vital force develops. So, yet pure and bright from the timeless was her birth. A lost world rapture lingers in her eyes. So, in her eyes lingers that lost world rapture. Her moods are faces of the infinite, beauty and happiness, her native right, and endless bliss is her eternal home. So, therefore, because the origin of the life energy or the vital energy or the emotional, emotions are part of that, but they're much more than emotion. This is the energy of motion. It is the prana shakti. It's the Sanskrit word. So this particular, the home of this comes from a very bright, pure, infinite, eternal, blissful source. So therefore, if you see, human beings on earth are always seeking immortality, bliss, eternity, happiness. This is always the aim of life. If you ask anyone, what is your aim of life? What is the aim of life? They will come back to this only. Why? Because the origin is this. However, to get this, a life force, when it enters into manifestation and on earth, and into the human being and into the human consciousness and into the earth consciousness, which is full of the inconscious and still subconscious, it tends to find it through this way, through pain and suffering, joy and happiness, and this alternation between the two. Now, this now revealed its antique face of joy, a sudden disclosure to the heart of grief, tempting it to endure and long and hope. So that's how we can even go through grief, because behind it we know that there is this endless bliss, tempting it to endure and long and hope, even in changing worlds bereft of peace, in an air racked with sorrow and with fear, and while his feet trod on a soil unsafe, he saw the image of a happier state. Who is he? Ashwapati. So even in an air racked with sorrow and with fear, even in changing worlds bereft of peace, he saw the image of a happier state. In an architecture of hieratic space, circling and mounting towards creation's tops, at a blue height which never was too high, for warm communion between body and soul, as far as heaven, as near as thought and hope, glimmered the kingdom of a griefless life. So in this hierarchy of the worlds that he sees, he says even in space, even in our whole of creation has been the architecture is hieratic, which means it is mounting and from lower to higher, and circling and mounting towards creation's tops, at a blue height which never was too high for warm communion between body and soul, as far as heaven, as near as thought and hope, glimmered the kingdom of a griefless life. So there is also in the life force, in the life energy, there is a griefless life. That means the origin of life, is griefless. It does not have sorrow and does not have the blemishes that life has on earth. So that is the source. That is how we can, all of us, whether we know it or not, consciously or subconsciously, aspire towards that. So, glimmered the kingdom of a griefless life. Above him, in a new celestial vault, other than the heavens beheld by mortal eyes, as on a fretted ceiling of the gods, an archipelago of laughter and fire, swarm stars apart in a rippled sea of sky. Tarred spirals, magic rings of vivid hue, and gleaming spheres of strange felicity floated through distance like a symbol world. On the trouble and the toil they could share, on the unhappiness they could not aid, impervious to life's suffering, struggle, grief, untarnished by its anger, gloom, and hate, unmoved, untouched, looked down great visioned plains, blissful forever in their timeless right, absorbed in their own beauty and content, of their immortal gladness they live sure, apart in their self-glory plunged, remote, burning they swum, in a vague lucent haze, an everlasting refuge of dream light, a nebula of the splendors of the gods, made from the musings of eternity. So here is a description of this beautiful kingdom of griefless life that Ashwapati sees beyond the plane of, so you see the glory and the fall. So he talks about the whole life plane, from the height to the depths, the glory and the fall of life. See the name of the chapter. So this is the glory of life that he is now describing, which is the origin of the life force. So this beautiful plane, which is above in a celestial vault, other than the heavens beheld by mortal eyes, and so on. Gleaming spheres of strange felicity floated through distance, like a symbol world. On the trouble and the toil they could not share, on the unhappiness they could not aid. They were beyond that. They could not help or share this unhappiness and trouble and toil. Impervious, they were absolutely immune, impervious to life's suffering, struggle, grief, untarnished by its anger, gloom, and hate, unmoved, untouched, looked down great visioned plains, blissful forever in their timeless right, absorbed in their own beauty and content, of their immortal gladness they live sure, apart in their self-glory plunged, remote, burning they swum in a vague lucent haze, an everlasting refuge of dream light, a nebula of the splendors of the gods, made from the musings of eternity, almost unbelievable by human faith. Hardly they seemed the stuff of things that are. As through a magic television's glass, outlined to some magnifying inner eye, they shone like images thrown from afar seen, too high and glad for mortal lids to seize, but near and real to the longing heart and to the body's passionate thought and sense are the hidden kingdoms of beatitude. Beautiful description of these inner kingdoms of beatitude that Ashwapati says that mortal lids cannot see them and mortal senses cannot feel them, but they are there, and they are there close to, and they can be felt by the heart, by the yearning heart. And it's almost like there mentions the name of television, uses the imagery of the magic television's glass. And it's like you're seeing it far away into some television through some sort of a lens, as through a magic television's glass outlined to some magnifying inner eye. They shone like images thrown from afar seen too high and glad for mortal lids to seize, but near and real to the longing heart, and to the body's passionate thought and sense are the hidden kingdoms of beatitude. So I think it's in the cells of the body that you can sense this and feel this, but it's not visible through the senses of the human, through our seven senses. But there is a sense of it, which is embedded in the cells of the body, because it actually originates from there, the life force. The five and intuition, and Mother's given 12 senses. The seven is most often used. Clairvoyance, clairaudience, all these are senses. That's why you can develop them. You can develop all your 12 senses. Human beings only develop 5. Little more evolved human beings develop 7. So there's the 5, and then there is the 6th is something else, and then 7 is intuition. And then it goes to clairaudience, clairvoyance, all those ones. All the inner senses, where you can see and you can hear and you can feel, and you can, yeah. Someone just take her out, mother's collected works. But they are in other places, so you have to correlate. And you can correlate there also in Savitri. Sri Aurobindo has written them here also, all the senses. Here in the Savitri also. He says so often that
senses give us the inner experience.
they are the inner senses that open through yoga, through any kind of inner practice. I mean, like here in Savitri, he's written several places that, what you think now is magic is going to be a very ordinary thing. Like he says, today we are using mobile phones to speak to each other. In a few years, mobile phones will not be required. No, telepathy is a sense. It's an inner sense. You will all develop telepathy. So we are still far away from, maybe we are a little further away. But what Sri Aurobindo says, all the yogis from time immemorial, and even now evolved beings, they communicate through telepathy. So telepathy is one of the senses. Now there are all 12 of them. So I one day counted them, now I can't remember offhand. Anyway, telepathy is one of them. All these ones I've mentioned are there. Clairvoyance, clairaudience, intuition. There's another one that they're inner, they're not outer. 7 are outer and 5 are inner. Look for the inner senses, now start developing your telepathy. We should not be reading Savitri. And when you don't communicate, don't talk. Just send your messages. But you can actually...
There are times you communicate.
Yeah, you do communicate.
But we are not used to it we haven't got it normalized. Like,
There is, many decades ago I read a book called Mind Control by Bruce Silva. I wonder if you've heard of it.
I have.
3 more after that. So there, he says human beings with the help of little meditation can train themselves to will the other person to think what you think.
Yeah.
God of yoga might
Yes.
have all these senses.
But they have that in the Sanskrit words. He has it. Drishti, I'm telling you, all the same. Clairvoyance, clairaudience, telepathy. There's another one. Anyway, now that we know that these are senses, and now that we know that we can easily develop them, if we pay attention, they can become very developed. I think they were being used even by very remarkable people during the war. They were being used. Those, they used to get these guys to sit there and get these telepathic messages when they needed some information. But they were those psychics that were being used. I know America invested a lot, and Russia. These are the 2 countries that did a lot of it. So, almost unbelievable by human faith, hardly they seem the stuff of things that are, as through a magic television's glass outlined to some magnifying inner eye, they shone like images thrown from a far scene, too high and glad for mortal lids to seize, but near and real to the longing heart, and to the body's passionate thought and sense, are the hidden kingdoms of beatitude. In some close, unattained realm, which yet we feel, immune from the harsh clutch of death and time, escaping the search of sorrow and desire, in bright, enchanted, safe peripheries, forever wallowing in bliss they lie. So who lies there? Escaping the search of sorrow and desire, in bright, enchanted, safe peripheries, forever wallowing in bliss they lie. Yes, are the hidden kingdoms in the beatitude. But they are very close to us, he's saying. Immune from the harsh. They are immune from the clutch of death and time. And they escape the search of sorrow and desire. In bright, enchanted, safe peripheries, forever wallowing in bliss they lie. And yet they are close, in a close, unattained realm, which yet we feel. In dream and trance and muse before our eyes. In dream and trance and muse before our eyes, across a subtle vision's inner field. Please note. So when your third eye opens, the subtle vision opens. What is the English word for it? When you can see? Clairvoyance. Trikala, no, all the 3, past, present, future. It's only the subtle vision. So that's another inner sense, one of the 12 senses. So, in dream and trance and muse before our eyes, across a subtle vision's inner field, wide rapturous landscapes fleeting from the sight, the figures of the perfect kingdom pass, and behind them leave a shining memories trail. So one gets in dream, in trance and muse, you get this sense of a beautiful, perfect kingdom of life and energy and light that is very close to us, which we sense and feel, that passes us transitionally, but which we can sense. So that is this world that Ashwapati has now reached and is describing. In dream and trance and muse before our eyes, across a subtle vision's inner field, wide, rapturous landscapes, fleeting from the sight, the figures of the perfect kingdom pass, and behind them leave a shining memories trail, imagined scenes or great eternal worlds, dream caught or sensed, they touch our hearts with their depths, unreal seeming, yet more real than life, happier than happiness, truer than things true. If dreams these were, or captured images, dreams truth made false earth's vain reality. If dreams these were, or captured images, dreams truth made false earth's vain realities. So these dream truths make actually earth's vain realities false. They are so captivating, so real, so, overwhelming, these planes. And when you have this touch of it, you almost feel that that is real and this is untrue. So, dreams caught or sensed, they touch our hearts with their depths, unreal seeming yet more real than life, happier than happiness, truer than things true. If dreams these were, or captured images, dreams truths made false earth's vain realities. In a swift eternal moment fixed, there live, or ever recalled come back to longing eyes, calm heavens of imperishable light. So, in a swift eternal moment fixed they live, this plane, or ever recalled come back to longing eyes. If you can recall them, they come back to one's eyes, into one's sight, into one's thought, into one's dreams. Calm heavens. These are calm heavens of imperishable light, illumined continents of violet peace, oceans and rivers of the mirth of God, the happiness of God, and griefless countries under purple suns. So this beautiful description of the origin and the glory of life, where it comes from, and these planes that Sri Aurobindo visits. Obviously he's visited in Ashwapati here, he's describing them.
So purple sun is a reference, like purple is the color
Yes.
associated with the vital.
Purple suns. Maybe that's why, with life, vital. Normally the vital planes are in purple, and maybe that's why he's used purple suns and not gold suns. Golden suns or red suns. Red is physical, gold is higher plane, supramental. Also the color coding also is there. So obviously he's describing something he's seeing. This once a star of bright remote idea, or imagination's comet trail of dream, took now a close shape of reality. The gulf between dream truth, earth fact was crossed. The wonder worlds of life were dreams no more. His vision made all they unveiled its own. Their scenes, their happenings, met his eyes and heart, and smote them with pure loveliness and bliss. A breathless summit region drew his gaze, whose boundaries jutted into the sky of self. and dipped towards a strange ethereal base. So, this particular, once Ashwapati had entered into this dream gulf, these wonder worlds of dream truth, his vision and his entry into that world created that bridge between the two. And the gulf between dream truth and earth fact was crossed. The wonder worlds of life were dreams no more. His vision made all they unveiled its own. Their scenes, their happenings met his eyes and heart and smote them with pure loveliness and bliss, and so on. The quintessence glowed of life's supreme delight. On a spiritual and mysterious peak, only a miracle's high transfiguring line divided life from the formless infinite and sheltered time against eternity. So obviously this is a description of plane of life that is the archetype or the prototype from where our life on earth draws its sustenance from. And when Ashwapati travels to this world, he becomes the bridge, the human bridge. And in his eyes and his heart, he experienced this wonderful bliss of the true life and the subtle physical life that is more truer than physical life itself. And when he does that, he, in a sense, can bring that parts of that down on earth through the idea that it is possible. So, if you notice here, a breathless summit region drew his gaze, whose boundaries jutted into a sky of self and dipped towards a strange ethereal base. The quintessence glowed of life's supreme delight. On a spiritual and mysterious peak, only a miracle's high transfiguring line divided life from the formless infinite and sheltered time against eternity. So time and eternity was absolutely close together in this plane. There was just one line that divided life from the formless infinite, which is eternity, and life being sheltered in time. Out of that formless stuff, time mints his shape. So time actually mints his shapes from that formless stuff or this formless infinite, and from this formless plane of life. Out of that formless stuff, time mints his shapes. The eternal's quiet holds the cosmic act. So this cosmic action is only there because the eternal's quiet holds the cosmic act. There is something that is static to allow that dynamic movement. And this eternal's quietude, this eternal's infinity is holding this cosmic act of life. The protean images of the world force have drawn the strength to be, the will to last, from a deep ocean of dynamic peace. So the protean images of the world force draw the strength to be and the will to last from where? From the deep ocean of dynamic peace, inverting the spirit's apex towards life. She spends the plastic liberties of the one to cast in acts the dreams of her caprice. His wisdom's call steadies her careless feet. He props her dance upon a rigid base. His timeless still immutability must standardize her creation's miracle. So again, this is a very, very mystic description, but also this is a description of and vision of a sphere and a plane of existence that is not open to the mental human being. So we will find it difficult to fully understand this, but we can sense what, Sri Aurobindo is pointing towards and what Ashwapati is experiencing. So you have to read this over and over again for some sort of the deeper meaning enter into the mind and the soul, because it is beyond the mental scope. This is something that is mystic, occult, and from another sphere. So, his timeless, still immutability must standardize her creation's miracle. Out of the void's unseeing energies, inventing the scene of a concrete universe. By his thought, she has fixed its spaces. In its blind acts, she sees by flashes of his all-knowing light. At her will, the inscrutable supermind leans down to guide her force that feels but cannot know. So here, out of the void's unseeing energies, inventing the scene of a concrete universe, by his thought she has fixed its spaces. By whose thoughts? Out of the void's unseeing energies. So out of the void's unseeing energies, those out of that infinite void, what he calls is the eternal quiet or the formless stuff or whatever, the different words he used for it. From there, from out of the void's unseeing energies, inventing the scene of a concrete universe. So the universe comes from that unseen energies, inventing the scene of a concrete universe, which is what we are in. By his thought, she has fixed its spaces. In its blind acts, she sees by flashes of his all-knowing light. At her will, the inscrutable supermind leans down to guide her force that feels but cannot know. Its breath of power controls her restless seas, and life obeys the governing idea. So even what he's saying here, that in this, the life plane, and here she is, of course, the primal, what you call as paraprakriti or nature, in the universal nature, the world force, yes. So these are all, it is that energy that creates the concrete universe that we are in, and also guides this blind force of life to obey the governing idea. The idea is with a capital I. What helps the life force to obey the governing idea? The supermind, the inscrutable supermind leans down, guide her force. So it is this energy that brings down, allows the supermind to guide the force that feels but cannot know. Its breath of power controls her. Otherwise life would run riot, would be completely uncontrollable if there wasn't a higher energy of power and dynamic power that could control us. So the supramental power is not just a mental power, it is a dynamic will of life. It is a dynamic power that can transform life, that can guide the mind, the life, and the body, and transform all three. So that is why this particular word is used here. By his thought she has fixed its spaces. In its blind acts she sees by flashes of his all-knowing light. At her will, the inscrutable supermind leans down to guide her force that feels but cannot know. To guide her force. Whose force? The force of life that she has brought into the concrete universe. To guide her force that feels but cannot know. Its breath of power controls her restless seas. Its breath of power. Whose breath of power? The supermind's breath of power. Controls her restless seas, and life obeys the governing idea of the supermind. At her will, led by a luminous immanence, the hazardous, experimenting mind pushes its way through obscure possibles, mid-chance formations of an unknowing world. Our human ignorance moves towards the truth that nescience may become omniscient. So, at her will, led by a luminous immanence, the hazardous experimenting mind, with a capital M, pushes its way through obscure possibles, mid-transformations of an unknowing world. Our human ignorance moves towards the truth that nescience may become omniscient. Transmuted instincts shaped to divine thoughts, thoughts house infallible, immortal sight, and nature climb towards God's identity. The master of the worlds, self-made, her slave, is the executor of her fantasies. She has canalized the seas of omnipotence. She has limited by her laws the illimitable. So what does this mean? The master of the world, self-made, her slave, is the executor of her fantasies. So this master of the world has made herself, self-made her slave. That is, the master of the world has made itself a slave, self-made her slave. That is, she has voluntarily become the slave. And when she becomes the slave of nature, of life, then she is the executor of her fantasies. Then she can execute that. Otherwise, she will be above it. She has to enter into it. She has canalized the seas of omnipotence. She has limited by her laws the illimitable. The immortal bound himself to do her works. The immortal bound himself to do her works. He labors at the tasks her ignorance sets, hidden in the cape of our mortality. The worlds, the forms, her goddess fancy makes, have lost their origin on unseen heights, even severed, straying from their timeless source, even deformed, obscure, accursed and fallen, since even fall has its perverted joy, and nothing she leaves out that serves delight. So you can see, that's why you can see all this happening in our life, in life, in the world. And that is why it is she who has entered into life and become the slave of the master of the worlds willingly. She who is the universal mother, the universal executrix, what you call as the world force, the world mother, the nature in its most highest form has entered into the lower natures of the world, of the earth, of life, of mind, of the physical, of mortality, so that she could limit herself. And when she limits herself, she creates. You cannot create something without some form of shape and substance and form. With formlessness cannot create, because it's formless, it's infinite, it is eternal. So to create anything, whether it's a flower, whether you draw something or you create a product, there is a certain amount of limitation that's required. And it is from that all this comes. It is at first the eternal who has limited himself, and in that limitation has created the entire concrete universe. So the universe is a creation of the eternal, and the eternal has limited itself and become a slave, in the sense bounded itself in the concrete to create this concrete universe. All these worlds, all of the forms you see, animate, inanimate, everything. So therefore, Sarvamidam Brahman, that verse of the Upanishad has this understanding. When you want to understand what it means, it's obviously something that has become itself here. It's lost its eternal form to create something and has gone into the nescience, into the inconscient, to create and to awaken it to consciousness. And this is the play, what they call is the Leela. So these are things that our mind and our purely rational, logical, mental, intellectual mind find it difficult to understand, because the mind is also a product of this creation. So it's limited by its understanding. But as the consciousness grows and deepens and the mind expands and goes to a higher level of expansion of intuition and of the higher illumined planes of mind, and the soul and the inner life begins to broaden, you will see that these things become very clear and are very easy to understand. However, if you understand it from a purely mechanical mind, you will find it difficult. But the idea is that we all have something deeper in us that knows. So the moment it touches that, we all have a sense that this is something that is true and something that is real, and we can understand it from that perspective. So here again, this is a passage worth reading again, because it's replete with so much of knowledge and wisdom and consciousness. It's sort of explaining the whole earthly creation and how it's been created. And of course, Sri Aurobindo repeats this often in Savitri in different forms and different images and different cantos to make this clearer and clearer to the consciousness. So here again, Ashwapati, when he is entering into this particular world, the world of life, which is prana shakti, or the prana, which is the animate, that which animates the inanimate. What is life in the end? It is that which animates the inanimate. And life is a form of energy or power that is the main ingredient of creation. Without life, there could be no creation. There could be no earth. It would just be a formless, infinite, dark mass. Life is what animates and creates. So that's why this is a very important canto. And it's very early on in the Traveller of the Books, of the Worlds, that Ashwapati and Sri Aurobindo bring it. But again, I think this is a canto that can be read and reread several times to understand it. Okay, so we'll start from here again, from the beginning. I'm sorry, I'm going to go very slow, but if I don't do that, it'll just skim over. The protean images of the world force. What does protean mean? Protean, yeah, it comes from proton. The smallest, minuscule, yeah. The protean images of the world force, the very atomic, the protean, that which you can read the exact meaning, but it'll give you a precise idea. The protean images of the world force have drawn the strength to be, the will to last, from a deep ocean of dynamic peace. So these are words to describe this again, this infinite, eternal, deep ocean of dynamic peace, inverting the spirit's apex towards life. She spends the plastic liberties of the one. Who is she here? She spends the plastic liberties of the one to cast its axe, the dreams of her caprice. His wisdom's call steadies her careless feet. So, who is she? Life, the world force? Yes. So, she spends the plastic liberties of the one. So this world force, or this world nature of this mother, universal Prakriti, is what he's describing here. She spends the plastic liberties of the one to cast and axe the dreams of her caprice. His wisdom's call steadies her careless feet. He props her dance upon a rigid base. He props. So here you've seen here the eternal quiet holds the cosmic act. So this is the eternal. He is the eternal that referring to. His wisdom's call steadies her careless feet. He props her dance upon a rigid base. Reminds you a little bit of Shiva, and he props her dance upon a rigid base. And his timeless, still immutability is because he is timeless and immutable and still, that she can do her dance and create, and the dance of creation can be manifested or can appear. So his timeless, still immutability must standardize her creation's miracle. So, out of the void's unseeing energies, inventing the scene of a concrete universe, by his thought, she has fixed its spaces. In its blind acts, she sees by flashes of his all-knowing light. At her will, the inscrutable supermind leans down to guide her force that feels but cannot know. Its breath of power controls her restless seas, and life obeys the governing idea. At her will, led by a luminous immanence, the hazardous experimenting mind pushes its way through obscure possibles, mid-chance formations of an unknowing world. Our human ignorance moves towards the truth, that nescience may become omniscient. Transmuted instincts shape to divine thoughts. Thoughts house infallible, immortal sight, and nature climb towards God's identity. And this is how evolution proceeds, and nature climbs towards God's identity. So, the master of the world, self-made, her slave, is the executor of her fantasies. She has canalized the seas of omnipotence. She has limited by her laws the illimitable. The immortal bound himself to do her works. He labors at the tasks her ignorance sets. Hidden in the cape of our mortality, the worlds, the forms her goddess fancy makes, have lost their origin on unseen heights, even severed, straying from their timeless source, even deformed, obscure, accursed and fallen, since even fall has its perverted joy. See, the glory and fall of life, even fall has its perverted joy. So there is a joy in everything, even in suffering, even in its fall. So therefore everything is included, even severe, straying from their time, this freedom, this liberty that is given to life, even deformed, obscure, accursed and fallen, since even fall has its perverted joy, and nothing she leaves out that serves delight. Nothing, life leaves nothing out that serves, or nature leaves nothing out that serves delight. These two can to the peaks revert or here, cut out the sentence of the spirit's fall, recover their forfeited divinity. At once caught in an eternal vision sweep, he saw her pride and splendor of high-born zones, and her regions crouching in the nether deeps. Above was a monarchy of unfallen self, beneath was the gloomy trance of the abyss. An opposite pole, or dim antipodes. There were vasts of the glory of life's absolutes. All laughed in a safe immortality and an eternal childhood of the soul. Before darkness came and pain and grief were born, where all could dare to be themselves, and one and wisdom played in sinless innocence, with naked freedom in truth's happy sun. There were worlds of her laughter and dreadful irony. There were fields of her taste of toil and strife and tears. Her head lay on the breast of amorous death. Sleep imitated a while extinction's peace. The light of God, she has parted from his dark to test the savour of bare opposites. Here mingling in man's heart their tones and hues, have woven his being's mutable design, his life a forward rippling stream in time, his nature's constant fixed mobility, his soul a moving picture's changeful film, his cosmos chaos of personality. The grand creatrix with her cryptic touch has turned to pathos and power being self-dream, made a passion play of its fathomless mystery. So, but one of the things about Savitri is that it is, because of its high level of consciousness from which it's written. The plane which Savitri was written by Sri Aurobindo is from the higher planes of the mind, the illumined over mental planes. Savitri cannot be understood unless you read it out aloud. So it's like a mantric thing. You have to hear it. Even when we are reading it, we hear it back from our ears. And it is the sound of Savitri that creates the resonance of its meaning when it is read out over and over aloud, like with all great scripture. It's the same with the Gita or the Upanishads and so on. It is very dense. It is written from an extremely high consciousness. It enters straight into the cells of the body, and therefore the mind is unable to capture its full meaning until it hears the word. And the word has to be repeated, like all mantras, for the meaning to escape and to come out from the word. And that is the great power of Savitri, which is why we read it over and over again, year after year after year, and it will possibly become, the scripture of the new age and of the new consciousness, because it holds in its being the secret of all knowledge that human beings and evolution needs for its next stage. So, here mingling in man's heart, their tones and hues have woven his being's mutable design, his life a forward rippling stream in time, his nature's constant fixed mobility, his soul a moving picture's changeful film, his cosmos chaos of personality. The grand creatrix with her cryptic touch has turned to pathos and power, being self-dream, made a passion play of its fathomless mystery. But here were worlds lifted halfway to heaven. The veil was there. The veil was there, but not the shadowy wall. In forms not too remote from human grasp, some passion of the inviolate purity broke through, a ray of the original bliss. So here there are three descriptions. One of the plane above, then of the plane below, then here has turned to pathos and powers, being self-dream, made a passion play of its fathomless mystery. And then he says, but here were worlds lifted halfway to heaven. The veil was there, but not the shadowy wall. In forms not too remote from human grasp, some passion of the inviolate purity broke through. So in forms not too remote from human grasp, some passionate of the inviolate purity broke through, a ray of the original bliss. Heaven's joys might have been earth's, if earth were pure. There could have reached our divinized sense and heart some natural felicity's bright extreme, some thrill of supernature's absolutes. All strengths could laugh and sport on earth's hard roads and never feel her cruel edge of pain. So, heaven's joys might have been earth's if earth were pure. However, alas, earth is not pure, and there could have reached some divinized, and then it could have reached our divinized sense and heart, some natural felicity's bright extreme, some thrill of supernature's absolutes. All strengths could laugh and sport on earth's hard roads and never feel her cruel edge of pain. All love could play and nowhere nature's shame. But she has stabled her dreams in matter's courts, and still her doors are barred to things supreme. However, this cannot be, because she, life, nature, has stabled her dreams in matter's courts, and still her doors are barred to things supreme. These worlds could feel God's breath visiting their tops. Some glimmer of the transcendence hem was there. Across the white aeonic silences, immortal figures of embodied joy traversed wide spaces near to eternity's sleep. Pure mystic voices in beatitude's hush appeal to love's immaculate sweetnesses, calling his honeyed touch to thrill the worlds, his blissful hands to seize on nature's limbs, his sweet, intolerant might of union to take all beings into his Saviour arms, drawing to his pity the rebel and the waif, to force on them the happiness they refuse. A chant hymeneal to the unseen divine, a flaming rhapsody of white desire, lured an immortal music into the heart, and woke the slumbering ear of ecstasy. A purer, fiercer sense had there its home, a burning urge no earthly limbs can hold. One drew a large, unburdened, spacious breath, and the heart sped from beat to rapturous beat. The voice of time sang of the immortal's joy, an inspiration and a lyric cry. The moments came with ecstasy on their wings, beauty unimaginable moved, heaven bare, absolved from boundaries in the vasts of dreams. The cry of the birds of wonder called from the skies to the deathless people of the shores of light. So this wonderful description here, where Ashwapati experiences absolute beautiful world, life world, where his senses, tuned to the highest ecstasy and woke the slumbering ear of ecstasy. The inner ear woke, the inner music, immortal music entered into his heart, and so on. A burning urge no earthly limbs can hold. One drew a large, unburdened, spacious breath, and the heart sped from beat to rapturous beat. The voice of time sang of the immortal's joy. So this glimmer of the transcendence hem was there. Across the white aeonic silences, immortal figures of embodied joy traverse wide spaces near to eternity's sleep. So this is when he sees this wonderful glory of the kingdom of what is called the pure and perfect life. The life that is the life divine, that its prototype is there, which Ashwapati glimpses and experiences. That's how he understands the yoga that he has to do to bring that life down on this earthly plane and bring what he says, writes in this book, The Life Divine, create heavenly bliss on earth. So this pure life could certainly come on earth, and he saw that possibility after he visited this plane of life, where he saw all the three planes, the nether planes, where life was deformed, the human plane where it was halfway between heaven and hell, both sides were there, it was all mixed up, and then of course the heavenly planes of the pure life, the prototype of the life as it is without deformation of ignorance. Okay? So this is, he keeps moving as the description keeps moving, as Ashwapati is moving from one plane of the life plane to another plane. So the voice of time sang of the immortal's joy, an inspiration and a lyric cry. The moments came with ecstasy on their wings. Beauty unimagined moved heaven bare, absolved from boundaries in the vasts of dream. The cry of the birds of wonder called from the skies to the deathless people of the shores of light. Creation leaped straight from the hands of God. Marvel and rapture wandered in the ways. Only to be was a supreme delight. Life was happy laughter of the soul, and joy was king with love for minister. So this was this wonderful plane of the pure life plane, where life was the happy laughter of the soul, joy was the king with love for minister. The spirit's luminousness was bodied there. Life's contraries were lovers or natural friends, and her extremes keen edges of harmony. Indulgence with a tender purity came and nursed the god on her maternal breast. There none was weak, so falsehood could not live. Ignorance was a thin shade protecting light. Imagination, the free will of truth. Pleasure, candidate for heaven's fire. The intellect was beauty's worshipper. Strength was the slave of calm spiritual law. Power laid its head upon the breasts of bliss. There were summit glories, inconceivable, autonomies of wisdom's still self-rule, and high dependencies of her virgin Son, illumined theocracies of the seeing soul, throned in the power of the transcendence ray, a vision of grandeurs, a dream of magnitudes, in sun-bright kingdoms moved, with regal gate, assemblies, crowded senates of the gods, life's puissances reigned on seats of marble will, high dominations and autocracies, and laurel strengths and armed imperative mights. All objects they were great and beautiful. All beings wore a royal stamp of power. There sat the oligarchies of natural law. So what does this mean? There sat the oligarchies of natural law. Proud, violent heads served one calm monarch brow. All the soul's postures donned divinity. So, proud, violent heads served one calm monarch brow. All the soul's postures donned divinity. There met the ardent mutual intimacies of mastery's joy and the joy of servitude, imposed by love on love's heart that obeys, and love's body held beneath a rapturous yoke. All was a game of meeting kinglinesses, for worship lifts the worshipper's bowed strength. Close to the god's pride and bliss, his soul adores. The ruler there is one with all he rules. To him who serves with a free equal heart, obedience is his princely training school, his nobility is coronet and privilege. His faith is a high nature's idiom, his service a spiritual sovereignty. There were realms where knowledge joined creative power in her high home and made her all his own. The grand illuminate seized her gleaming limbs and filled them with the passion of his ray, till all her body was its transparent house, and all her soul a counterpart of his soul. Apotheosized, transfigured by wisdom's touch, her days became a luminous sacrifice, an immortal moth in happy and endless fire. She burned in his sweet, intolerable blaze. A captive life wedded her conqueror. In his wide sky, she built her world anew. She gave to mind's calm pace the motor's speed, to thinking a need to live what the soul saw, to living an impetus to know and see. His splendor grasped her, her puissance to him clung. She crowned the idea, a king in purple robes, put her magic serpent scepter in thought's grip, made forms his inward vision's rhythmic shapes, and her axe, the living body, of his will. A flaming thunder, a creative flash, his victor light rode on her deathless force. A centaur's mighty gallop bore the god, life throned with mind, a double majesty. Worlds were there of a happiness great and grave, an action tinged with dream, laughter with thought, and passion there could wait for its desire until it heard the near approach of God. Worlds were there of a childlike mirth and joy, a carefree youthfulness of mind and heart, found in the body a heavenly instrument. So worlds were there, if you see the way, and there and there. So he's constantly describing the different worlds and the different planes he is seeing in the kingdom of life. And that's why Canto is called the glory and the fall of life. So worlds were there of a childlike mirth and joy, a carefree youthfulness of mind and heart, found in the body a heavenly instrument. It lit an aureate halo round desire and freed the deified animal in the limbs to divine gambols of love and beauty and bliss. On a radiant soil that gazed heaven's smile, a swift life impulse stinted not, nor stopped. It knew not how to tire, happy were its steers. There work was play, and play the only work. The tasks of heaven, a game of godlike might, a celestial bacchanal forever pure, unstayed by faintness, as in mortal frames. Life was an eternity of rapture's moods. Age never came. Care never lined the face. So their age never came. It was absolutely ageless. Care never lined the face, imposing on the safety of the stars, a race and laughter of immortal strengths. The nude god children in their playfields ran, smiting the winds with splendor and with speed. Of storm and sun they made companions, sported with the white mane of tossing seas, slew distance trampled to death under their wheels, and wrestled with the arenas of their force. Imperious in their radiance like the suns, they kindled heaven with the glory of their limbs, flung like a divine largesse to the world, a spell to force the heart to stark delight. They carried the pride and mastery of their charm as if life's banner on the roads of space. This needs rereading. This is extremely dense with its imagery, with its thought, and what Sri Aurobindo is trying to say through this particular canto, and especially Ashwapati, who has traveled into this kingdom of life, because life is something that is very close to earth. The earth is governed by the life plane. And this is therefore very important and very close. This particular kingdom and world that Ashwapati visits, it's very close to the earthly life plane that we are. And its origins are in this particular world. And therefore its influences are very powerful and persistent in our own life and in the life of the earth. And nature is the force of nature, the executrix, that actually is the executing force of life. So we have this new idea that we have learned today, that the plane of life that we see and that we are aware of on earth actually has its origin in a higher plane, which comes from a prototypal kingdom or world of life, which has its, the heights. Life on earth therefore can change, because if this wasn't there, how would it change? So the moment one has this glimpse of a greater life, you can see that how and why earthly life can be transformed into the life divine. So, fourth line from the top, 126. Life throned with mind, a double majesty. Worlds were there of a happiness great and grave, and action tinged with dream, laughter with thought, and passion there could wait for its desire until it heard the near approach of God. Worlds were there of a childlike mirth and joy, a carefree youthfulness of mind and heart, found in the body a heavenly instrument. It lit an aureate halo round desire, and freed the deified animal in the limbs to divine gambols of love and beauty and bliss on a radiant soil that gazed at heaven's smile, a swift life impulse, stinted not nor stopped. It knew not how to tire, happy were its tears. There work was play. So this, if you notice, each sentence begins with, there this happened, this world was there, and so on. So this world that Sri Aurobindo here is describing, which is where Ashwapati is traveling, is the world of the glory of life. So this world particular, and of course there are different planes. So he describes the glory and the fall of life. This particular part we're reading are the different planes in the higher life. There work was play, and play the only work. The tasks of heaven, a game of godlike might, a celestial bacchanal, forever pure, unstayed by faintness, as in mortal frames. Life was an eternity of raptures, moods. Age never came. So this was a place where there was no age. Life never aged in this plane where life and mind were thrown together in the higher world. Life was an eternity of raptures, moods. Age never came. Care never lined the face, imposing on the safety of the stars, a race and laughter of immortal strengths. The nude godchildren in their playfields ran, smiting the winds with splendor and with speed. Of storm and sun they made companions. So this was a wonderful place where there was ageless, there was no care, there was no worry, and a race and laughter of immortal strengths. And there were these godchildren that were running in the playfields, smiting with the wind and playing with the storm and sun. They made their companions, sported with the white mane of tossing seas, slew distance trampled to death under their wheels, and wrestled in the arenas of their force. Imperious in their radiance like the suns, they kindled heaven with the glory of their limbs, flung like a divine largesse to the world, a spell to force the heart to stark delights. They carried the pride and mastery of their charm, as if life's banner on the roads of space. Ideas were luminous comrades of the soul. So in this plane, ideas with a capital I were luminous comrades of the soul. Mind with a capital M played with speech, cast javelins of thought, but needed not these instruments toil to know. Knowledge was nature's pastime like the rest. investitured with the fresh heart's bright ray, an early God instinct's child inheritors, tenants of the perpetuity of time, still thrilling with the first creation's bliss, they steeped existence in their youth of soul, an exquisite and vehement tyranny, the strong compulsions of their will to joy, poured smiling streams of happiness through the world. So this is all a description of this plane where these God children are playing and enjoying, and this is their life plane, and they are totally free to do and carry on their work. They carry the pride and mastery of their charm, a spell to force the heart to stark delight. So, this is a higher plane of life. Ideas were luminous comrades of the soul. Mind played with speech, cast javelins of thought, but needed not these instruments toil to know. So mind also did not need any instruments toil to know, did not need the physical brain. It just could cast its javelins of thought. This is this particular plane of life and mind where both of them are sitting together. Knowledge was nature's pastime like the rest. Investitured with the fresh heart's bright ray, an early God instinct's child inheritors, tenants of the perpetuity of time, still thrilling with the first creation's bliss, they steeped existence in their youth of soul, an exquisite and vehement tyranny, the strong compulsion of their will to joy, poured smiling streams of happiness through the world. There reigned a breath of high, immune content, a fortunate gate of days in tranquil air, a flood of universal love and peace. So this was a place, this life plane, where these eternal children who never aged, who had no care, who had no worries, lived in their youthfulness. And this was a place where there was a flood of universal love and joy and peace. And they lived in a breath of high immune content. There was such a large immunity that nothing could disturb it. A flood of universal love and peace. A sovereignty of tireless sweetness lived. Tireless sweetness. So sweetness on earth, life on earth, tires of sweetness. But here, sweetness could continue to be sweet and not get tired of being sweet. So here on earth, life cannot take too much of any extreme. If there's too much of sweetness, we want the opposite. If there's too much of joy, we need pain. If there's too much of happiness, we need grief. To bring, what should I say, the rasa of life here on earth. Otherwise, it becomes very dull and monotonous, and you get bored. So, unlike this, in this plane, they were able to contain and maintain that sweetness, that calmness, that happiness at a very high level of vibration, of plenitude, and did not tire of it, which means that there was a purity there that does not exist on. That when it came down on earth, which we can't hold it. But in this plane, all the people, all the children, the youthful youth could hold that kind of thing. So it's very interesting to know. That's why it says very clearly, a fortunate gate of days and tranquil air, a flood of universal love and peace. Now, if we were to live in a flood of universal love and peace forever, what would happen to all of us? We'd become lotus eaters. What would happen? We'd all fall asleep. So, or get bored and look for some adventure. Human beings will need adventure all the time. They cannot live a mundane, even a high-pitched life, even if it's on a very high plane. Human beings cannot sustain it, and life on earth cannot sustain it. So, a flood of universal, a sovereignty of tireless sweetness lived. That's why tireless sweetness lived, like a song of pleasure on the lips of time. Look at the beauty of the words and the poetry. A large spontaneous order freed the will, a sun-frank winging of the soul to bliss. The breadth and greatness of the unfettered act, and the swift fire heart's golden liberty. There was no falsehood of soul severance. So the greatest falsehood that life has or is characterized by life on earth is the falsehood from one's soul, from one's inner being, the contact with one's psychic nature. So here, there was no falsehood of soul severance. There came no crookedness of thought or word to rob creation of its native truth. All with sincerity and natural force. So you can see how glorious this plane of life is. That is being described where Ashwapati has gone. There came no crookedness of thought or word to rob creation of its native truth. All with sincerity and natural force. There, in that plane, freedom was the sole rule and highest law. In a happy series climbed or plunged these worlds in realms of curious beauty and surprise, in fields of grandeur and of Titan power. Life played at ease with her immense desires. 1,000 Edens she could build nor pause. No bound was set to her greatness and to her grace and to her heavenly variety. So unless this plane of pure existence, of life, of prana, of the prototype of a perfect life exists, how could we, unless that exists somewhere, only then can we bring it down on earth. So this is the prototype or the ideal, the traveler. This is the plane of life in its highest glory that Ashwapati has now visited and has known. And therefore, when he comes back, he can ask for the boon that this life plane be brought down to earth through the agency of Savitri, who is the world redeemer and mother. 1,000 Edens she could build nor pause. No bound was set to her greatness and to her grace, and to her heavenly variety. Awake with a cry and stir of numberless souls, arisen from the breast of some deep infinite, smiling like a newborn child at love and hope. So, smiling like a newborn child at love and hope, in her nature housing the immortal spa, in whose nature? In this higher nature of this life, the glory of life, the plane of life. So in life, in the higher life, in her nature housing the immortal spa, in her bosom bearing the eternal will, no guide she needed but her luminous heart. No fall debased the Godhead of her steps. No alien night had come to blind her eyes. There was no use for grudging ring or fence. Each act was a perfection and a joy, abandoned to her rapid fancies, moods, and the rich-colored riot of her mind, initiate of divine and mighty dreams, magician builder of unnumbered forms, exploring the measures of the rhythms of God. At will she wove her wizard wonder dance, a Dionysian goddess of delight, a bacchant of creative ecstasy. This world of bliss he saw, and felt its call, but found no way to enter into its joy. Across the luminous gulf there was no bridge. A darkest air encircled still his soul, tied to an image of unquiet life. This world of bliss he saw and felt its call, but found no way to enter into its joy. Across the conscious gulf there was no bridge. A darker air encircled still his soul, tied to an image of unquiet life. In spite of yearning mind and longing sense, to a sad thought by grey experience formed, and a vision dimmed by care and sorrow and sleep, all this seemed only a bright, desirable dream, conceived in a longing distance by the heart, of one who walks in the shadow of earth pain. So here Ashwapati saw this wonderful world of bliss, of perfect life, and he felt its call, but he could not find the way to enter into its joy. There seemed to be a conscious gulf there without a bridge, and he felt a darker air encircled his soul, and in spite of the yearning mind and longing sense, he was unable to fully bring down this life or enter into this perfect life. To a sad thought by grey experience formed, and a vision dimmed by care and sorrow and sleep, all this seemed only a bright, desirable dream, conceived in a longing distance by the heart, of one who walks in the shadow of earth pain. Because that's where he was. He was walking in the shadow of earth pain, and this seemed almost like a bright, desirable dream which he couldn't reach. Although he once had felt the Eternal's clasp, too near to suffering worlds his nature lived, and where he stood were entrances of night, hardly too close beset by the world's care. Can the dense mould in which we have been made return sheer joy to joy, pure light to light? So, because our natures are too close to the suffering worlds, and because we are submerged, all around us is the inconscient and the subconscious, and we are beset by the world's care. And so therefore the dense mold, our body, which is the physical dense body, cannot return sheer joy to joy and pure light to light. It's unable to do so. So same with Ashwapati. He was also made of the same substance. He's a human being, and he could feel that his body's self, his human mold, dense mold, was unable to return sheer joy to joy, pure light to light. For its tormented will to think and live, first to a mingled pain and pleasure woke, and still keeps the habit of its birth, of the mingled pain and pleasure. A dire duality is our way to live. We are unable to live without the opposites there. So we cannot live with just pleasure or just bliss. We have to have pain and suffering. So a dire duality is our way to be. In the crude beginnings of this mortal world, life was not, nor mind's play, nor heart's desire. Now from here, this line on, in the crude beginnings of this mortal world, is a kind of it's a narrator's voice. It's not Ashwapati's voice anymore. It's Sri Aurobindo who's now explaining that this is the state of the world. Because in this mortal world means the crude beginnings of the way that life, the mortal life, started. The human being came into this world. What was at that time? Life was not, nor mind's play, nor heart's desire. When earth was built in the unconscious void, and nothing was save a material scene, identified with sea and sky and stone, her young gods yearned for the release of souls, asleep in objects, vague, inanimate. So, in the beginning of the mortal world, There was no life, nor no mind's play, nor heart's desire. No vital, no mental, no physical of the human being. When earth was built in the unconscious void, and nothing was save a material scene, just nothing but matter was there, identified with sea and sky and stone, her young gods yearned for the release of souls asleep in objects, vague, inanimate. In that desolate grandeur, in that beauty bare, in the deaf stillness, mid the unheeded sounds, heavy was the uncommunicated load of Godhead in a world that had no needs. For none was there to feel or to receive. This solid mass, which brooked no throb of sense, could not contain their vast creative urge. When the first life on earth began, that time there was only the Godhead, there was no other. It was the divine that was seeing itself. There was nothing. There was no human beings, there was no life, there was no mind, there was no vital being. And at that time, her young gods yearned for the release of souls. So what is this reference to young gods? What do you think he's trying to refer here to? Heavy was the uncommunicated load of Godhead in a world that had no needs, for none was there to feel or to receive. This solid mass, which brooked no throb of sense, there was no sense the sense is something that can perceive, there was no perception. There was only the solid material world, solid mass of matter, without life and mind and sense. The solid mass which brooked no throb of sense could not contain their vast creative urge. Whose vast creative urge? The gods. The young gods, or the Godhead that had come down into matter for matter to turn. So, the solid march which brooked no throb of sense could not contain their vast creative urge, immersed no more in matter's harmony. The spirit lost its statuesque repose. So, the spirit lost its statue-like repose, immersed no more in matter's harmony. The spirit lost it. In the uncaring trance, it groped for sight, passioned for the movements of a conscious heart, famishing for speech and thought and joy and love, in the dumb, insensitive, wheeling day and night, hungered for the beat of yearning and response, the poised inconscience, shaken with a touch, the intuitive silence trembling with a name. They cried to life to invade the senseless mold, and in brute forms awake divinity. A voice was heard on the mute rolling globe. A murmur moaned in the unlistening void. A being seemed to breathe where once was none. Something pent up in dead, insentient depths, denied conscious existence, lost to joy, turned as if one asleep since dateless time, aware of its own buried reality. Remembering its forgotten self and right, it yearned to know, to aspire, to enjoy, to live. Life heard the call and left her native light. So life heard this call and left her native plane of light, overflowing from her bright, magnificent plane on the rigid coil and sprawl of mortal space. So here it's a description again, this kind of a flashback. It starts from these lines in the crude beginnings of this mortal world. And then here he's explaining, the narrator, how life actually entered into this dumb material world. So they cried to life to invade. Who cried to life? These young gods. These young gods could be either nature gods, or they could be, the original gods that came down into matter, love, and was the first Godhead. So I'm not very sure who he means here, but obviously it is the original Godhead that plunged into matter that he's referring to. So he says these are the gods that were calling down something to come into matter, and was calling down the spirit, and was calling down life and mind and so on. So in the uncaring trance it groped for sight, passioned for the movements of a conscious heart, famishing for speech and thought. So the spirit started famishing, started being, was famished for speech, life, thought, mind, joy and love, in the dumb, insensitive, wheeling day and night, hungered for the beat of yearning and response, the poised inconscience that was completely unconscious and dead, the poised inconscience shaken with a touch, that intuitive silence trembling with a name. They cried to life, these young gods. This Godhead cried to life, to invade the senseless mold. That is how life came from the plane of life, the original prototype of life, the glory of life, came down. And when it came down, life fell, because it entered the unconscious inconscience of the material world. But in its own plane, life was glorious and perfect. So, the poised inconscience shaken with a touch, the intuitive silence trembling with a name, they cried to life, to invade the senseless mold, matter, and in brute forms awake divinity. A voice was heard on the mute rolling globe, a murmur moaned in the unlistening void. A being seemed to breathe where once was none. Something pent up in dead insentient depths, denied conscious existence, lost to joy, turned as if asleep since dateless time, aware of its own buried reality, remembering its forgotten self and right. It yearned to know, to aspire, to enjoy, to live. Life heard the call and left her native light. Overflowing from her bright, magnificent plane, life came down on the rigid coil and sprawl of mortal space. Here too the gracious, great winged angel, this is the image to describe life coming down, a gracious, great winged angel, life poured her splendor and her swiftness and her bliss, hoping to fill a fair new world with joy, as comes a goddess to a mortal's breast, and fills his days with her celestial clasp. She stooped to make her home in transient shapes. In matter's womb, she cast the immortal's fire. In the unfeeling vast, woke thought and hope, smote with her charm and beauty, flesh and nerve, and forced delight on earth's insensible frame. Alive and clad with trees and herbs and flowers, earth's great brown body smiled towards the skies. Azure replied to azure in the sea's laugh. New sentient creatures filled the unseen depths. Life's glory and swiftness ran in the beauty of beasts. So not only did it run in matter, but it also entered to all living things, the beauty of beasts. It was life that was running in the beauty of beasts. Man dared and thought and met with his soul the world. But while the magic breath was on its way, before her gifts could reach our present hearts, a dark, ambiguous presence questioned all. the secret will that robes itself with night and offers to spirit the ordeal of the flesh, imposed a mystic mask of death and pain. Interned now in the slow and suffering years, sojourns the winged and wonderful wayfarer, and can no more recall her happier state, but must obey the inert inconscious law, insensible foundation of a world in which blind limits are on the beauty laid, and sorrow and joy as struggling comrades live. A dim and dreadful muteness fell on her. Abolished was her subtle mighty spirit, and slain her boon of child-god happiness, and all her glory into littleness turned, and all her sweetness into a maimed desire. To feed death with her works is here life's doom. Life on earth has to feed death with all her works and her beauty and her power and her life force, because when she descends down to the plane of earth, she is also partakes of the inconscience of the earth. So veiled was her immortality, so veiled, so covered up was life's immortality, that she seemed inflicting consciousness on unconscious things, an episode in an eternal death, a myth of being that must forever cease. Such was the evil mystery of her change. End of Canto 3.